remove it, and that is why we are commending to the Senate that the Senate should support the government's efforts to repeal the carbon tax.
Senator Whish-Wilson.
Thank you, Deputy President. I'd be very keen to hear from Senator Cormann on a number of factors. Mid last year, the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry came out in quite a high-profile series of announcements calling on the government to consider an emissions trading scheme. And I'd be interested to know whether Senator Cormann, in opposition, discussed this with them then, and also if there's been any discussions with the big end of town about an emissions trading scheme. I'd also be interested to hear from Senator Cormann on how some of the direct action strategies, such as soil carbon and tree plantings, are going to work without a price on carbon. It doesn't make sense that you could bring in a scheme that attempts to value carbon reduction without actually being able to put a value on that carbon. And of course that's not just a volumetric thing, but it's also a value thing with a price. So I'd be very interested to hear about that as well. And you know, I saw a YouTube clip. My kids actually showed me a YouTube clip last month with the Prime Minister. This is going back to 2007. In an interview, our current Prime Minister, in an interview, saying he supported a carbon tax, that he didn't agree an emissions trading scheme was the right way to go, and he supported a carbon tax. Now, no doubt that was some sort of short-term strategy for him to elevate himself within the Liberal Party, which of course eventually happened when your party voted on a carbon tax, but on an emissions trading scheme, and the Prime Minister became the leader of the opposition. But I think for Senator Singh's benefit, it's worth considering in her comment about whether we would have an effective emissions trading scheme now if we'd implemented one back then, when she said the Greens stood against an emissions trading scheme. What we've been reduced to today is a concerted campaign by our Prime Minister Tony Abbott in opposition to undermine a good policy. And I have absolutely no doubt Senator Singh, he would have done exactly the same thing as Leader in the Opposition against an emissions trading scheme had that been in place. The reason for one of the main reasons for a fixed price period was to get the information from the polluters so that we could issue cap and trades, the volume-based measures that were coming into place effectively, because sadly that didn't happen in Europe. They over-allocated permits, and of course, given supply and demand, we saw a collapse in the price of carbon over there. So that was to be avoided. But I have no doubt that why we're here today, why the bells are going to ring very soon on a division, I have no doubt this is because of a short-term political strategy by the coalition to grab power and get themselves elected. They saw an opportunity, which Senator Milnes talked about earlier, around the word tax, and they have reduced this good policy and this action on climate, this transition to a new economy in this country, and our position as global leader to three-word slogans, which they claim got them elected at the last election. But when those bells ring, it's worth all of us asking for whom the bell tolls, to use those words of Wilfred Owen, and exactly what it is that we've given up in this country and what it is that we've signed up to. It's not just a loss of a policy that took years to put together, that is working, that has put us on the global leadership map in terms of climate action, along with our world-renowned scientists and the work they're doing on climate change. It's also worth focusing on the symbolism of what this vote's going to mean today. It's going to mean, for students of history and students of politics, that a political party, for its own cynical, self-interested agenda, has been able to run a smear campaign, the most negative political campaign in Australia's political history, to put the interests of their party, the Liberal Party, ahead of the interests of this country. And, Senator Cormann, if you think you got elected on the back of the carbon tax, or your campaign on the carbon tax, I would ask you to have a look at your result in Western Australia in the recent by-election, where you stood up in this chamber how many times saying that it was going to be a mandate on the carbon tax. Well, it didn't turn out to be that way in the end. I think today is a very important day to be on the right side of history, and I'm glad to have had the opportunity to stand up here today. And I also think it's worth pointing out, and I know, Senator, I was listening to a lot of the debate and I really wanted to respond to this one comment from Senator Bernardi that he doesn't believe it's at all challengeable that the coalition got elected on the back of the carbon tax and the repeal of the back of the carbon tax. Well, I want to say it here today that I think the coalition got elected. It rose from the ashes of the Labor Party at the last election. In my first 12 months in the Senate, I witnessed the Labor Party, with their leadership struggles, tearing themselves to pieces. And if you think you got elected because of the carbon tax, I think you need to have a good close look at what's happened in this building in the last 2 years. You got elected by default. That's my firm opinion. And it is what underlies your arrogance on this budget that's in front of the Australian people, your lack of ability to compromise, to consult. You are so out of touch because you have the arrogance to assume you got elected on the back of a carbon tax repeal agenda. It is not true. You got elected because this mob over here had a major stoush, which is going to take them a long time to recover from. And if you don't realise that and start focusing what the Australian people want, which is strong action on climate change, then I hope we do go to a double dissolution and we can let the Australian people vote on this. If not, I'm sure in 2016 this issue is going to be front and foremost of the political agenda in this country, that is getting proper action on climate change. Now that I've had my rant, Senator Cormann, could you please answer whether you've had discussions with the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the big end of town, and how a direct action scheme that values soil carbon and planting trees can work without a price on carbon?